Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Night School. I am joined by Bob himself. Bob, how you doing?
Got my glasses today.
That's right.
I'm ready.
We're looking studious and educated. So if you are new to the series, this is an ongoing series where I am trying to educate my friend Bob here on the art of dungeon mastery and how to build your own game and how to hone your game master skills. And we decided to start off with the simplest and most basic time-honored tradition, which is building your own dungeon.
It was cool. It was definitely fun.
So last time I left Bob with some homework. Now, we talked about sort of how to design your dungeon as a board game or as a play space, how to create interesting decisions for your players, and to not think of the map as sort of a map yet, but to think of it as a flow chart. And I gave Bob homework to do this with his dwarven stronghold idea, which you can see over there in our past episodes about the subject. So, Bob, any thoughts here before I haven't seen Bob's homework yet. He insists on making this a surprise. So Bob, any thoughts before I pull this in?
No, it was a little bit harder than I thought. Okay. I felt like some things were a little bit repetitive as I was working on it, and I couldn't tell if excuse me, at least again, it was a thought experiment. So we're going to be messing with stuff, but I was already thinking like three-dimensionally going below. So I was like trying to pull myself back. I was like, okay, remember, this is just a board game for now. This is just rooms. And where would things actually go and transpire? But then I was also thinking, okay, this is a dwarven stronghold. So how is this being used or worked on? Then I started going, oh, this is where I'm like, okay, am I thinking about this too much now? Where I'm like, all right, where should they have the barracks? And like, well, you'll see when you open this again, Christmas morning here, opening it up, but I can't destroy this thing to pieces, but I thought I did a fun job.
All right.
I did it all in a Dungeon Draft.
Oh, okay. Dungeon Draft, which is a really cool program. All right. So here we have, we brought up on screen here in our Microsoft whiteboard, and I'm going to get the red pen out.
Oh, the red pen.
And so here we can see Bob's initial node-based design for his Dwarven Stronghold.
Now we had to think of things. You wanted me to do at least 12 rooms.
Yep.
And you wanted me to think, which I think I did a lot more than 12, but it made sense because I really like symmetry. And you'll probably see that as you go forward that I'm really big into symmetry. But we had to have three main, I say antagonists, but low-level goblins. Then we're having the undead, and then hypothetically the lich, which was going to come in at 3. Okay. So I color-coded these for you, where the brown middle goblins, undead on the left and right with the stone, and the blue stone is the lich. But again, I would have wanted my liches below, personally, like below ground. But I thought for this experiment, they're just in the back. And so that's kind of how it went.
All right. Well, I thought this red was going to work, but it doesn't look like this red is as good at viewing up here. So I'm gonna change it over here to this black. Hopefully this will let me actually try a different color entirely, because this is much darker than I expected. And of course, seeing as how this is the first time that I'm seeing it, thanks, Bob.
Yeah. Surprise.
Okay. So you're saying, there we go. So you're saying that you're saying the goblins are here.
Yeah. In the brown.
In the brown. And then this area is
undead left and right.
Okay.
And then the blue in the back is the lich.
Okay. Lich. It's very high level.
Or, well, we had talked about some kind of, I don't know, necromancer.
Yeah. I think we said necromancer.
Sorry, I'm so used to lich from the Patreon.
All right. So, yeah. All right. Well, let's think about this. Let's talk about this, and let's start breaking this down. Okay.
So I'll tell you initially what my thought was that you're going to come into this stronghold, which is sort of built into a mountain-esque area.
Yep.
So the entrance is sort of between areas, so it can kind of get to a choke point, so that having these artillery areas on the left and right to shoot people that were coming into the area was my thought. But that there's really only one main entrance to this stronghold, and that's where you'd enter the foyer at. And so what you're seeing is my mountainous terrain is kind of my thought process.
Gotcha. Well, okay. So let's ignore for a minute the labels in your dungeon. And let's just talk about some of my personal critiques.
Yep.
Okay, so the first is it is overly symmetrical.
I love symmetry.
Okay. So generally speaking, I'm going to say that symmetry is bad.
Well, let me break that. Let me think about this. Would a dwarven stronghold, these master builders,
yep,
not have symmetry?
No. They would not.
I disagree.
So also, I mean, a couple of things to keep track here, of course. This is not the real map, right?
Correct.
This is a representation of the map. But the problem with a symmetrical board is it inherently makes the choices less exciting. Because once the players figure out, forget dwarves, forget everything. These are real human beings who are playing your game. Once they figure out that this dungeon is symmetrical, they're going to go, when they enter this room, they're going to know what's here, they're going to know what's here, they're going to know what's here, and they're going to know what's here. You've taken that away from them.
Yeah, I get that.
Right? There's no more exploring. There's no more discovery. They've figured it out. They find stairs here and they go, oh, well, we've never even been to this side of the dungeon. I bet there are stairs here. And they are correct. Right? And that's the danger with a sort of symmetrical design. You're actually sort of robbing your players of some of that fun of exploring the space.
I can see that. I think that's a good point.
So
I really like symmetry.
Well, that is something that you should definitely work on and sort of avoid, because asymmetrical design makes the decisions more interesting. It makes them more, involved and convoluted. And that's part of what we want to do. That's part of the fun of the design.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number two, again, we're ignoring the labels from right now. We're just thinking about the layout of this dungeon. So we enter here into the foyer.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this sort of grid here area.
Yep.
Okay. Which are a bunch of linked areas, all in sort of an interlocking grid.
Some with doors, some without doors.
Again, ignore the doors, right? Ignore the features of these. It's just in terms of like a play space.
Correct.
Right. So part of the problem with this is when you have this many interconnections so tightly close together, it's very hard to make these areas sort of distinct and separate. Now, you made this like sort of, the goblin tribe area. But the problem with this is the way that you've designed this. And again, there could be some other areas for this. This means that because there's only this one entrance. So how did the necromancer ever get in here?
Oh, he was there.
Well, necromancers are living, breathing people.
Yeah. My thought was,
so if the necromancer wants to go outside, what has to happen?
I don't teleport.
So your level 1 dungeon has a level 14 lich in it?
I guess I didn't think about that, but I will say that my thought process was that the undead were the dwarfs that used to live here, and because this powerful undead presence, when they died, they sort of risen as undead. They are in their stronghold behind the doors where the barracks are at, where their artillery storages are, and that's why they're sort of roped off. And the goblins could only access the main area when they came in after the fact.
No, it makes so a couple things. If this is sort of your necromancer area, it makes total sense that the goblins would never be able to access this and probably never found this secret door.
Correct.
But going back to your point before, why don't the undead come out and kill these goblins?
I don't know if they care.
They don't care that goblins are infesting their stronghold. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is you haven't, undead are sort of a dangerous thing, and most living creatures are not going to live near undead. Right. Think about,
so how do you normally keep an undead separated?
Think about like Night of the Living Dead type scenario, right? Right. Like, would you want to live next door to zombies and, skeletons and stuff like that? No, you wouldn't.
So I was thinking of it the other way. Like the goblins couldn't get in that area because of the heavy door that blocks the barracks area, but not the other way around. Like why can't the undead come out?
Well, the other thing too is if there is a heavy door that blocks the undead in, right, then it's kind of like, well,
but ideally it's their old door.
Sure. Well, but the other thing is too is, by creating these two areas, they are symmetrical, but by creating these two areas that on the left and right, that are both full of undead. Well, you've also sort of created another problem, right? Which is, the party comes in here and they fight some goblins and they have some battles, and then they come over to here and then they somehow manage to penetrate this, and then they fight some undead, and they're like, oh, that was pretty cool. And then maybe they clear this out, and then they come back, and then they go this way, and they're like, oh, this is going to be very different. It's literally the same exact thing as on the right.
Yeah, I can see that.
Not only is it mapped the same, it's the same enemies, right? This is so
it would be the same enemies.
This will be cool, but this will be like kind of boring because they're like, oh, didn't we already do this?
Yeah, it's sort of repetitive and redundant at that point.
It's a little bit repetitive, and it's definitely redundant because at that point, what is that adding? What is that adding to the dungeon experience, to the game board experience?
Yeah.
So that is a problem.
Yeah, I can see that.
The other thing is too, from an exploration, a simulus position. So these dwarves only had one entrance into their stronghold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that sounds very defensive. It actually sounds suicidal, right? Why, what if the dwarves needed to escape? What if the dwarves needed to?
Well, there was always supposed to be like a back way in, which is that's how it got overran in the first place. I think we talked about it in episode 2.
Right.
I just didn't know if that should be part of this experiment or not.
I mean, it could be, right? Because that could be an area of the dungeon that is sort of, hereto unexplored, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there is an area here.
Well, you should have gave me a 24 room minimum then. I would have mapped this thing out.
Well, maybe there's like a series of caves. These are more like natural caverns, right?
That's a good idea.
If think about Helm's Deep from the movie Two Towers, right? The idea was that you had this mountain, right? This is the mountain. And then like Helm's Deep was built right onto the side of the mountain with the big wall right here. Yeah. And this was the keep. And if you remember, like the women and the children were in caves.
Yep.
Behind, and they talked about how there was like passages off into the mountains, right, to provide a way to get in and out.
Yes. So I would have liked to have had something like that.
Right.
But it was supposed to be definitely secretive.
Right.
This was how the goblins, or sorry, it's how the dwarves were betrayed.
Right.
A while back.
Well, the other thing is too, is like there's a lot of rooms here which are kind of essentially redundant. And that's the other thing I wanted to talk about here.
Okay.
In terms of the design. Because remember, sometimes less is more. Okay.
Well, so, like I said, I thought of this as like, this is what the dwarves would have in their stronghold.
So when I come into this room, okay, or this section or this region, I've essentially given the choice to go here, here, and here. Okay. Yes. So whether I go left or whether I go left or up, I guess, west or north. Okay. I'm going to put a little compass rose here so we kind of can talk about things. If I go north or west, one of the things that I like, if I go north, the secret door presumably is secret. So let's pretend for a moment that it's not there. One of the things that I'm gaining access to is this room and this room.
Yes. Which
means that if I ever go back to this room, I've already been to this room, and this room is now just kind of a straight through room.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what value this room provides. Right. And like these artillery rooms are just kind of entryways into the storage rooms. Right.
Correct. Well, we had talked about what dead end rooms could be, treasure rooms or
like
piles of something.
Right, like these are interesting dead end rooms. Right. But from a design perspective, why not have something like, why not have a way or a function for like, okay, I fought my way and I've gotten to this room.
Mm-hmm.
Why doesn't this room connect to that room? Right. Or give me some way to access something that maybe I didn't do before. Right. Like your room, the flow of your dungeon is very, it's very Candyland-esque, right? It's,
oh man.
It's very, very deliberate. It's very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? Like,
look, I laid this out as an architect, would lay out a dwarven stronghold.
Right. And that's not what you want to do, right? Like, you want the game decisions, the board decisions to be interesting, right? And one of the ways that you can make this interesting, or make it more interesting, is access. What does this room give me? It gives me access to interesting and new places. Like, even this secret door here gives me access to this room, which if I go one room over, I have access to that room.
Yeah, my thought was again, no one, like, again, if I was a guest of the dwarven stronghold for whatever reason, I'd enter the hall, which is where you'd eat or something like that next to the kitchen. You wouldn't go into the trade room.
Right. You'd
be giving them your stuff.
So
they go and trade, and now, then the king's chambers off that.
As a mark, what you are doing is you're designing your dungeon the way that, say, a lot of Paizo APs are designed, right? Which is what makes sense for this building realistically.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is you end up with a real building, which, guess what, are very boring, right? Real buildings are like easy to navigate, and they make sense. And there's not like these, crazy architectural elements, because that would make the building difficult to navigate, which would defeat the purpose of the building, especially a large public works building, right? And it's almost like you need to take your architectural principles and sort of, do the reverse of them.
Yeah, well, I started as an architect. It's hard to go backwards now.
Right.
You guys were dungeoning when you guys were teenagers.
Right. So, my kind of takeaways are it has this needless symmetry. I think that the goblin section, this sort of middle section, is like overly repetitive.
Okay.
Because it's just a series of, it's basically like a series of, like, for example, if we could just like knock down a couple of these walls, this would just be one big room.
Yeah.
Right. And you're talking about fighting goblins here, right? Which are a sort of an intelligent, tribal species. So presumably, once you get into a fight here, you are going to be fighting every single goblin. So do you want the goblins to be one big fight?
No.
Right. So there needs to be some reason why the goblins can't all just dogpile on this room. Otherwise, you're either going to have to design this encounter so that the party gets killed.
See, that's where my issue comes in, because if I was the dwarven stronghold, and this was back in the day, and the dwarfs had this place, and there was an issue, you'd want all the dwarfs to coalesce on the foyer and stop the enemy.
Right. And that's a very reasonable decision, but from an architectural standpoint, but then you need to come up with a thought process for why the goblins maybe don't have control of this. Because if they do, they are going to do exactly that to the PCs, right? There has to be something that is stopping them from doing that.
That is a good point.
Right. And that is definitely sort of a failing of this design. Okay. The third thing that I was going to add is I'm not very satisfied with what you're calling the Lich, but that's way too high level.
The Necromancer.
I just don't like their location. I feel like this is isolated, trapped. It stinks of being the boss location, which we talked about trying to avoid. Right. I think that it's obviously like, oh, that's where I'm supposed to go.
Yeah, well, and that was my thought process. But we talked about if you were smart and you were able to figure out the secret door, you can avoid the boss room and just get to the downstairs in this case, which is where you'd want to go or something.
Which is, I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, that is something. I will give you some points for that.
Yes.
But I do. I mean, I like the idea of these sort of, twin rooms here that, can be defensive, but I do find that this is just very, very too symmetrical.
So you're almost like some architectural elements that a building would have do make sense, but when you just do it only for that reason, it's sort of boring.
Well, I guess another way to think of it is this. You have a bunch of square rooms here, but if you were to think about I did it as a game board tiles. Yeah. If you were to think about your rooms as being laid out as circles, okay, sometimes you want short connections. These are all short connections, and sometimes you want long connections, right? Like part of what makes a map interesting is when one area of the map gives you access to unexpected areas of the map. Does that make sense?
Yes. Also, this reminds me like of Madden. Because you're just drawing.
Yeah. The goblins have them lined up here on the, and they're in the nickel dime. You know, I mean, a great way of thinking about this, although it's not ideal, but a great way of thinking about this is like the game board for Clue.
Okay.
Right. Where you have those, you know, it's a board and you've got.
Oh, is the conservatory lets you get all the way to.
Right. And
what's the other room?
And you've got the secret door, right, that can take you all the way across the board. And so when you get there and you do the thing, you feel like, oh man, you know, I just kind of cheated a little bit. I feel special. You know, I uncovered something that I really think, you know, could have done. So I'm going to give this a C-, Bob.
All right. I think I'd still get through high school that way.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this: if anybody put this much thought and practice into their design, I think that they would, you know, I think they would definitely be doing better than a lot of people out there. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And you know, if you're talking about playing with your new players, they're going to be so like, oh my gosh, it's goblins. Oh my God, it's an undead. You know, like that. They're not.
The worst part I think of this whole thing now that after we're talking about it is literally. Like you said, you fight the goblins. That was really cool. I fight the undead. Also really cool. And then across the way, you fight the same undead. In my mind, I'm like, that's really boring. And so that part I really don't like of my design. The rest of it, I'm new and I'm sort of learning still. But that one, I feel like that doesn't, I should have thought about that. And that doesn't, I don't like that part.
Right. And it just can become repetitive. And I mean, I think a lot of it just comes from this needless symmetry. You know,
I'll have to shake that.
and again, because part of the fun is exploring it. Part of the fun is finding these, kind of crazy exploration, zones. Like that's what makes exploring the dungeon, itself kind of fun and kind of a challenge. And again, I also think it would be also fun and cool to have more than one entrance.
Yes, like, I agree with that.
Like if there was a secret stone entrance here. Or if the dwarves had like a smuggling tunnel that led to some
tunnel,
that led to some natural caves, and that's how the goblins first, entered. But the dwarves would sometimes use it as a back entrance, right? Just give the players these different, options because they're going to want to be able to feel like they're exploring and be able to kind of gain access to these different areas that otherwise, you wouldn't be able to gain access to. And again, I think also, it also creates a problem. Now, undead have a nice advantage that undead don't need anything. That's one of the reasons why undead are so nice to put in dungeons. Same thing with constructs, because you can stick them off in the corner somewhere and they don't need anything. Now, we're not playing David Attenborough, the RPG here. Like, I'm not as worried about like, oh, does every creature have adequate food, light, water, but you should give certain considerations to it. But, unless this necromancer or this lich is a completely passive entity in this dungeon, then this is a terrible location for it, right? Because we talked about, we wanted these sort of competing factions, right? And we talked about the PCs are one.
Yeah.
The goblins are a second. And the third was supposed to be this necromancer, right? Yeah. Now the undead
they're part and parcel.
Well, they're not, right? They're just sort of there. Right.
Oh,
well, because we talked about
they don't have a stake in the game.
They don't have a stake in the game. They're not like planning. They don't have plots, right? The goblins, they have a plan. The PCs, they have a plan. The necromancer, it has a plan, right? The undead are sort of just almost like they're big, scary, evil, but they're rats. You know what I mean? Like they're not. They're vermin. They're just here to sort of provide sort of a challenge. They're not really an actor in this situation, right?
Definitely failed on that part. I definitely did not have that.
And the design and so the design that you sort of incorporated here makes it very difficult for this entity to act, right? And one of the things that we talked about it a little bit in the video, but we really covered it in the Patreon bonus content. So Sorry if you're not a patron, but
one more reason to join the Patreon.
One more reason to join the Patreon. But one of the things that we talked about was the importance of, I talked about the different types of rooms. And one of the types of rooms I talked about was these idea of these nexus rooms, right? Rooms that were sort of like neutral zones or demilitarized zones or no man's lands. That's what
I was calling node and node.
Right.
That's what I was trying to do with those.
That sort of exist as sort of barriers between the major power players. But see, the major power players are your goblins.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think I was thinking too much in the undead as a power player.
These are your goblins. That's one power player. And your other power player is right here. And look at this. There's no space between them. Why wouldn't, assuming this necromancer is probably one of the most powerful beings in your dungeon, right?
He would be.
Why wouldn't he what's preventing him from coming out and just smashing these goblins?
I don't know. Goblins aren't part of his master plot.
Right. Well, then we have a problem, right? Because these creatures or these entities were supposed to be part of our power brokage, right? Like it was supposed to be this triangle of the PCs, the goblins, and the necromancer. And, the goblins want something from this place. And they are trying to accomplish something from this place. What is that? What is their motivation? The necromancer is trying to accomplish something. What is that? But presumably they aren't working together, which means that they are in each other's way. They are maybe want the same thing. Maybe they don't want the same thing, but they nonetheless are, competing and getting in each other's way. So,
I drew this as the goblins look like they backed the necromancer into a corner.
Yeah. You make it look like he's hiding and that he's been driven.
That's what I'm looking at it like. Shit, they were like, yeah, we got this area, bro. Good luck.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So they've got him pinned in. They've got him trapped,
Those are really strong goblins. You know what they are? Goblin warriors level 1.
No, level -1. Goblin.
They're just OP.
Yeah. So, again, I think that there's some improvement that, that probably needs to be done here. And I really think you need to sort of go back to the drawing board in terms of the symmetrical design nature of it. I just don't think this is going to be an interesting way to experience it. And I think that some of these rooms are probably a little derivative. You don't maybe need so much in this one section here. I think part of not making it symmetrical would help with that.
Do players start to question things like, let's say I just got rid of areas. Do players go,
nope.
Did they have a kitchen?
Nope.
How are they? Where are the toilets?
Nope.
Okay. I was just wondering.
I can list on like one hand the number of dungeons I've ever had that had toilets, when in doubt, a couple of things. You don't need to have a room that is, for toilets. You know what I mean? Like it's easy enough or something like that, or a water source. If you're talking about living creatures that lived in a place, okay, the sort of the main things that you should probably at least think about addressing, or at least touching on, is some way to get access to water, right, and some way to get outside or otherwise have access to food.
Okay.
Right. And I guess the third thing would be a measure of safety, right? So like what safety? It's hard to write with this thing, but if you had a room, and it doesn't have to be like the well room, but if you had a room and it had like a big stone well and it went down to some underwater lake or underwater river, it's
like, check, they get water.
Yeah. Check. They have a way to get water. But if you want to be more real, it also depends on your group. Like if I was playing with some of the old school folks from our Patreon Discord, if I was playing, with Ben and Donnie and Aaron, I might think about that well, and that well might become one of the major focal points of contestation in the dungeon, right? Because the goblins want to control the water, but so do the lizard folk. And maybe there's a small kobold tribe, and everybody's fighting over this water, and who can ever control the access to the well is in that much better of a shape. So, if you have a group that really wants to dig into this and sort of, kind of take that to the next level, you can use these things like water and food and safety as sort of primary drivers. But I wouldn't even necessarily be worried about that. I would just be thinking about this in terms of, is this an interesting game board experience? And almost everything, and I think you definitely have come around to it. But I think, with your newer players, I think like you said, I think they would come in here and they would be like, oh my God, it's goblins, and they'd fight these things, and they might go, oh, that's a scary door, we don't want to go through it. And then they come south, and then they go east, and they're like, oh crap, it's undead. That's kind of cool. It's kind of scary. And oh, okay, you know what? Maybe these undead are a little too tough for us, or maybe we're a little afraid of them. Let's go over here and check out what's happening over here. And then they're like, wait a second, this is exactly more of the same. And I think it's at this point, that they become bored.
That's when I lose them.
Yeah. It's like at that point when they go west, that they become bored and they lose them, and they kind of go, they may not even be able to verbalize it or vocalize it, but they are going to feel it, and they are definitely going to sort of understand.
I'll hear his AC's 22. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Well, that's to say nothing of creature design, but I think we'll give it a C-, and I think we can,
back to the drawing board.
Maybe we can do a little bit better on that, for the next time. So,
all right. So what is the lesson for today?
All right. Well, today, we don't have as much time because we did have to cover a lot of that. So today I wanted to talk about, and again, when I said originally back in episode 3, some of these things that we're doing here, like the sort of the dungeon, I guess I would say the dungeon flow chart, which I always like to do before I start actually physically mapping it on graph paper as like a real entity. And I talked about these as a couple different ways that you could sort of map this out. But the other one I talked about was sort of this idea of the encounters. And you don't have to go, do 1 and then do 2. You can kind of go, sometimes you go back and forth. Some people might even like to start with understanding what are the encounters that I want to build first. Then I'll build my flow chart because I have a better understanding of what is going to be inside of my dungeon. And we got a little bit off topic last time that we did this night school because we started talking about hybrid XP models and all this other stuff. But for purposes of today, and now some of this definitely applies to 5th edition D&D. Obviously, the exact metrics and the exact measures are a little bit different. But we're going to kind of talk here in terms of Pathfinder 2. Okay. So one of the things that you need to ask yourself is, my people are playing this game. They want to have really fun, cool encounters that they're going to remember. And hopefully those encounters represent a variety of different types of encounters. They could be puzzles, traps, combat encounters, maybe even social encounters, interaction, a chance to role play, even though that's not what I really call role playing. But we know, Bob, you've been playing these games now for 2 years, that regardless, XP is a double-edged sword, right? Because you can have a great session and have a lot of fun. But if that XP award at the end of the session is a little light, you feel maybe like not as good,
Well, and especially in PF2 where I feel like leveling is such a big thing.
Well, I mean, that's a separate topic entirely.
At least, and when I play PF2, I am like, I can't wait to level up, get new feats.
I will say this: PF2 is also a double-edged sword. PF2 gives you exciting options at every level, which means paradoxically, you're also really excited to level up and therefore kind of disappointed when you don't level up. So it is kind of a double-edged sword because, in maybe a game like 5th edition, you might look at the next level and say, I don't really get anything for leveling up here. I'm not making a cool choice. I'm not, like level 3 is a really cool level in 5th edition. You choose your subclass, but when you're like gaining level, maybe like 7 or 9 or something that doesn't have like an ability score improvement, you're kind of like, there's not a whole lot for me to look forward to. I'm not as excited about leveling up, so it's not a big deal to me. But in Pathfinder 2, they messed up and they gave you all these really cool options at every level. And so now it can feel, I mean, some of this is a modern problem. I will be the first to admit that. If you're playing with a bunch of folks who grew up playing in the 70s and the 80s, they're not going to maybe be as bad about this. But for a lot of people, not leveling is sort of disappointing. And you definitely want to know where you stand at and where you're at. Now, we talked about milestone models, and this is definitely a good option if you are running a fairly linear game. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be railroading. It just means a linear game where you expect the players are going to, do A, and then they might do a bunch of stuff. You're not going to necessarily force them, but at some point they have to do B.
Yep.
Okay.
They got to get there.
They got to get there. They got to do the thing. And when they do B, check mark, milestone, they level up, and then they can move on to there. And especially if you're very honest and open with your players about, hey, you'll level up after you do B. I mean, at that point, the ball's in their court. If they want to go and do a bunch of other stuff, that's great. But they know that that's not getting them any closer to accomplishing their goals and accomplishing their mission, and certainly not accomplishing the goal of leveling up. So there is some, validity to that. But the traditional case, especially in a dungeon where we do not have a linear model, we don't know if the characters are going to come in and go straight for the necromancer. We don't know if they are going to take out the undead and then maybe find that flight of stairs and go down and never come back to this level ever again. So we can't dictate what they're going to do. So what we have to start thinking about is, what is the pace of play that we want our party to experience? All right. So what do I mean by that? Well, Pathfinder 2, very conveniently, requires 1,000 XP to level up. Now, that means that your characters, your party members, are going to have to encounter 1,000 XP worth of monsters, worth of encounters, worth of traps, worth of everything in order to gain their next level. Now, you need to make some decisions about what you think is an acceptable leveling up rate. Pathfinder 2 says that you have several different types. These are all in the core rulebook, by the way. There are several different types of encounters. You have a moderate encounter. Okay. And that is worth 80 XP. Mm-hmm. And then you have a severe encounter, which is worth
120.
120. And I will tell you, familiar as I am with the game, that neither of these fights should result in a death to one of your party members. Certainly
severe only if you do like some unoptimal builds.
Yeah, severe could be dangerous to a party member if the dice go really bad, if the party has a lot of spellcasters or people who rely on limited resources, and those are very low. Like if they've fought 3 or 4 moderate encounters and they have maybe 2 or 3 spellcasters in the party who really rely on those spell slots to get the job done, and by the time they get to this severe encounter, most of their highest level spell slots have been expended. Maybe they're even just down to cantrips. This severe encounter could be potentially very dangerous. So randomness is a big factor. Resources, have they been depleted? And then the third thing is, like you said, Bob, is, are the characters playing well and are they built well? Certainly if you have a bunch of newer players who are not very, they haven't watched every single episode of Combat and Tactics, and they haven't, embraced the really, really minutia of Pathfinder 2, even fresh from town, a severe encounter can be potentially very dangerous. So, use them with caution. But generally speaking, these are the bulk of the encounters that you are going to encounter in a Pathfinder 2 game. Now, for completeness sake, there is also the extreme. And my general recommendation is, unless you fully expect for your players to have a reasonable chance of many people dying, possibly TPKing, I wouldn't use an extreme fight unless it is one that the players are essentially aware of and preparing for and understand what is at risk and are willing to go in against it anyways. Or if there is every ample opportunity for them to flee. Like if there is some extreme encounter, like some, giant iron giant golem thing, and it's way above the party and it's an extreme encounter, but when they encounter it, they quickly realize it, but the iron golem can't like fit through the doorway or something, it's too big and it's programmed not to chase people through the dungeon. So it goes back to its regeneration node and, hooks in and powers down and waits to protect again. The party has oh crap, that was really scary, but we're also not all completely dead. In fact, you almost kind of get a lot of the bang for the buck of the extreme encounter without actually having to actually go through it.
Yeah, I actually could see that being very scary and fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like it can be, it could be really, really, the those could be some of the most fun fights in,
What I don't like though is like how it takes like 10 of these battles just to level up.
Right. So
I can't stand that. That's like so long.
yeah. So let's just to finish this up for completeness sake. So there's low and there is trivial. So a low is 60 and a trivial is 40. And in case you're wondering how this works, right? If you double it or if you half it from 80, that's how you end up at the either end. And then if you go in between those two, that's how you end up with the low and the severe, right? Mm-hmm. So trivial is literally that. Like this is something, it's almost more like for flavor. This is never really going to challenge any of the characters of Pathfinder 2. A low encounter can be interesting and useful, especially if you are not allowing your characters to recover all their hit points. You're not allowing them like 20 or 30 or 40 minutes to treat wounds between fights. But generally speaking, in a Pathfinder 2 encounter, right, you have essentially only one bar that matters, and that's their hit point bar. Mm-hmm. Right. And because of the way that, you have access in this game to, you have treat wounds through medicine, mm-hmm. And you also have access to focus spells, which can heal.
Yep.
Lay on hands is a classic one, but there's a couple in the game. And what this basically means is that given sufficient time, right, the party will be at 100% HP.
Yep.
Right.
Almost every single time.
Almost every single time. And I would even go on to say that the game is sort of balanced around that concept. When I'm talking about a moderate fight being very low risk, that means that if the party members, they come into the fight and they are at, full HP, if they're topped off at full HP and then, the fight starts, chances are pretty good that they are actually going to end up being completely fine. Right. Yep. But if they went into a moderate fight and they were only at half HP, well, that could be a very different fight.
Yeah.
Right. So that is something to definitely take in mind. But so how you interact with this, and we'll cover this in a later episode, Bob. But Gary Gygax used to say that that time management is one of the most critical dungeon master skills.
And in business too.
Yeah. So, we'll definitely be looking at that, in the future, but just be aware that in a traditional Pathfinder 2 game, especially APs, if you are using a bunch of moderate and severe encounters, if the players aren't getting to 100% HP, those fights are going to be a lot tougher than you might think they are. In fact, I would argue that if your players are not giving a lot of time to heal up in fights, then you could probably get away with using low and moderate encounters and actually have a pretty interesting situation on your hands. So you have access to these treat wounds and these focus spells, which would basically get you to full hit points. So part of the allure, but also part of the fact of the matter is with Pathfinder 2 games, unless you run out of hit points, so unless you get to the big, 0 and become dying, how many hit points you lose is sort of irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because
if you're at 1, you can hit just as hard.
Right. Because if you're at 1, you can hit just as hard. And then the fight ends. And then you have sufficient time and you have access to treat wounds and you have access to focus spells to heal you. And then you are back up to full.
Yep.
So whether you lose, 25% of your hit points or 50% of your hit points, or 75% of your hit points, as long as there is time afterwards to heal back up, it kind of doesn't matter to a certain extent. And I think that this is something that, again, is very important to understand when we're talking about Pathfinder 2, but for time management purposes, but we're not talking about that today. All right. Okay. So that's our baseline to work with. Now, that being said, what we talked about before is that there we go. We talked about before that most of the time you're going to be fighting moderate and severe encounters.
Yes.
And that means that on average, one of your fights is going to generate 100 XP. All right. Just the mean of those two values. Now you need 1,000 XP to level up. Now, remember, I said encounter, An encounter can be a lot of things, right? An encounter can be a combat.
Traps, puzzle, hazards.
Yep. It can be a combat. It could be a trap or some sort of other hazard. It can be a puzzle. It could be some sort of, social or RP, as we would call it, role-playing type encounter. So anytime that the party is being faced with a challenge where there is potentially consequences to their actions and they have to make decisions, that's an encounter. And so as written, you need 10 of these to level up. Now, there's a lot of reasons why, but typically you are going to be lucky if you can manage one encounter per hour.
Yeah. I would say 2 per 3 hours.
And if we're being real realistic, if you have let's just say a 5-hour session, you are almost always going to lose 1 hour just to everyone getting settled, everyone getting sit down. It's a social game. You're going to, immediately bathroom breaks, everything like that. So you're going to be down to 4 hours. Okay. And then typically you might lose another hour because you're not always in an encounter, right? In these games, sometimes the party's debating, do we go left? Do we go right? Should we fight the undead now or should we fight the undead later? Don't get me wrong. Those are cool things. It's part of what makes role-playing games fun, but also realize that the way that the game is structured and written, you don't get rewarded for that, right? The game promotes, and I don't think this is a bad thing, the game promotes action, right? The party that is taking action and is getting shit done is going to get a bigger reward in terms of XP than the party that kind of sits around and dithers all day, right? Yeah. The party that sits around and debates for 3 hours about what we're going to do and only does 1 or 2 encounters might only end up with 100, 200 XP. And if they play like that every session, then they are going to level up every 5 sessions. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Again, going back,
it'll take me like years to get done with something.
Right. And we've talked about this on the channel, but I think there's a lot of reasons why that could potentially be problematic. So what are your options? Well, some people may be fine playing like this, but we talked about before about this idea of hybrid XP models. And I think nowhere is that more useful and cool within the game than within Pathfinder 2 than in a dungeon, like a dungeon that we are building. Okay. Now I should also note, I'm going to look it up so I can give you the page reference. Here we go. Pathfinder 2 on table 10-8, okay, has written down what they call an XP awards table. Okay. This is table 10-8 in your core rulebook.
Okay.
I didn't mean to cross that out. I meant to underline it. And it says that for a minor, moderate, and major accomplishment, the party can earn 10, 30, and 80 XP.
So it's almost like milestones.
So this idea is
like a mix.
Yeah. So the idea is not just from encounters, okay, but you can put into your dungeon, right? You get to decide essentially by allocating experience points, how quickly or how fast your group is going to level up. Okay. Because if I want my party to have to get through 10 combat encounters and I want it to take maybe 3 sessions, maybe 4 sessions to level, then I might just leave it like this and say, yep, you got to fight this fight. You got to fight this challenge. You got to solve this puzzle. And, that puzzle's worth 80 XP. That hazard was worth 120 XP. That, other thing was worth 120 XP. And that one's worth 80 XP. And you just keep doing that and that for 3 to 4 sessions. And then the group will level up. And you're going to have to get a lot of fights.
Is that how people design things? They go, I want them to level up in 3 sessions. So therefore this is how I'm spreading it out.
Well, whether they mean to or not, that is what they are doing. If you think about Rise of the Rune Lords, one of the things I did is I cut a lot of what I considered to be extraneous combats. And the reason why those extraneous combats were in the game is because at the time, Pathfinder 1, nobody did milestone-based experience. Everybody did, you needed this many experience points to
you
level
gotta
up.
grind.
So the game designers had to stick in enough XP that you were going to have to, that you would encounter these things so that you would be the right level to face the next set of challenges. Okay. And we're going to finish this topic and then we're going to talk about that. And that's going to be the last thing that we're actually going to talk about today.
Okay.
But using this standard model, okay, you would need to put in, a bunch of moderate and severe fights, maybe a couple lows. You could put an extreme, but they probably aren't going to be able to beat that. And you're going to have to put in combats, traps and hazards and puzzles and role-playing scenes and it, to get them to this 100 XP. But alternatively, especially now, all of those things, and this is the big secret, I think. We talked about this back in episode 1 when I talked about why dungeons. And one of the things that I think has been sort of missing from role-playing games is this idea that we recognize 3 stages of play in role-playing games, or at least in Pathfinder 2. This is basically true in 5th edition as well. We recognize that there is the encounter mode, right? Where essentially you're an initiative, or, the players are kind of taking turn by turn by turn by turn. And then we think about exploration.
Yep.
Okay. And then we think about downtime.
Yeah, I knew all these.
Okay. And in Pathfinder 2, these are very clarified. These are very, very distinct phases of the game. But there is traditionally a strong association that the encounter, that's what generates XP. I mean, even that table that I was just showing you, that was, right there where the moderate, those are all encounter awards, right? For the book, we'll call it the adversary level, right? And so we are used to thinking about the game as encounters equal XP. And most of the time, let's face it, and I'm not trying to lie to you here, most of the time those encounters are combats. So people think combat equals XP. And that's the mantra, that's the sort of the ditch we've dug. But you can use this table, or your own table of your own, sort of creation, to do something very revolutionary. And that is to allow your exploration to award XP. Okay. So I'm going to draw this better so that it looks correct, but get rid of that there. So exploration can have XP as well using this table. Okay. Now, how? Well,
yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
That's a great question. Okay. So one of the ways that you could do it now, exploration is not about the player characters. Okay. A counter mode is about the player character, the PC, right? What is my stat? What is my build? What are my hit points? What is my armor class? What is my attack roll? I am going to compare those things against my opponents, and we're going to see who comes out on top. And if I've built a strong enough player character, okay, I will be successful and triumphant, and I will earn my XP. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, I have to make some decisions as well, like, am I going to move here to flank or whatever? But realistically, I am shoving my character against your character. They're battling it out, and we're going to see who wins. Exploration is about the player.
You yourself.
It's about the people sitting around the table. And as I said, it's sort of a preview of one of the rules of Dungeon Craft. But the third rule of Dungeon Craft, okay, states that a good adventure, okay, a good adventure challenges both PC and the player.
I agree.
Okay. It shouldn't just be about, are my skills high enough? Right. But at the same time, it also shouldn't just be about like, let's ignore the dice. Let's ignore the characters. You made these feat choices. Those should be important. You made these, mechanical choices for your characters. Those should be important. You should challenge the PCs. You should challenge their stats, but you should also challenge the player. And the best way to do this, and we also have said many, many times, right? Look, whether you want to admit it or not, people want to level up. And if you want people to interact and you want people to care about something, you need to reward it. And that means XP. And that means rewarding exploration.
Still, how do you do it?
All right. So I was going to put you on the spot, and I was going to say, so give me an example, Bob.
The only one I could think of is when we played Abomination Vaults. Was that you rewarded discovery.
Okay.
And you were like, oh, you discovered a secret room.
Translate that into your dungeon. That we.
If you got that secret door and you got to that stairs and didn't have to fight the necromancer.
Yeah. What if finding that secret door was worth 80 XP?
Yeah.
Or what if that secret door was worth 160 XP? What if that was extreme exploration? What if that secret door is actually like a mural, right? And it has a bunch of like hidden clues in it. And by exploring the dungeon, the party able to put together what the mural means. They're able to speak the password and it opens. That sounds like that was awesome and required a lot of thinking and a lot of interaction and a lot of paying attention and maybe a lot of note taking from your players at the table, not Pathfinder 2. I'm talking about Bob and I'm talking about Nick and I'm talking about Robert sitting around a table and actively engaging with the game. Why not reward them for doing that? Okay. If the party members discover lore about the dungeon, like they're coming here, nobody knows why the dwarven stronghold fell. But maybe once the party puts together the clues and they discover that there was a traitor that betrayed the dwarves and let the goblins in, they have just sort of uncovered this awesome secret to your game. It's kind of like this cool, like, whoa, what a big revelation. No one knew that. What if that was worth 100 XP or 120 XP or 80 XP? We
talked about that in the first episode too, like discovering the purpose of the dungeon.
That's right.
Letting your players discover it. It actually does two things. One, it can be rewarded, but also it keeps them interested in what's next.
Right. Well,
what am I finding out next?
Yeah. I mean, best case scenario, right? Like, your players would be interested anyways. So why not, why not reward them with it too, right? Double down on it, right? Yeah. And make it so that it's like, oh, wow, this is healthy and tasty, right? Like it's right. It's like the best of both worlds. And then your players are going to get really, really engaged because they're going to suddenly realize like they are totally in control of how they are going to earn experience points here.
Yeah. I want to go battle or do I want to look for clues and look for discoveries?
And there's nothing wrong with getting into some battles, right? Like that's totally fine. But when you do that, and that's the only thing that you award experience points for, you're sending a very clear message. It's basically none of this other shit matters, right?
Also, I think it goes back to my dungeon where we talked about repetitiveness and redundancy.
Right.
If you only are rewarding something one way, do the players sort of feel, oh, another battle? Yeah, the battle is cool, but it is just another battle. But when you start pulling at other mental strings of theirs, they start going, oh, I'm getting tested on multiple levels here. Yeah,
so one of the first things that the players are probably going to discover when they come to this dungeon is that it is full of undead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe new players don't, but maybe you pique their interest and you say, you kind of maybe even ask them the question, why?
Yep.
And now you and I, Bob, we know why this dungeon is full of undead. It's because of
the ley line and the necromancer.
That's right. The evil ley line, right? Well, the players don't know that. But as they explore your dungeon and they start to interact with things, they might find some clues. They might put pieces together. They might make some skill checks even in exploration mode. They might cast some divination spells or rituals. They might put 2 and 2 together. They might take a leap of faith. They might take a leap of logic, or they could just explore the dungeon long enough and deep enough to eventually figure out, oh, these undead are being empowered by this evil ley line. Wait, that, and you're like, yes, that's worth 80 XP. And they're like, oh, that's what the necromancer wants. And you're like, yes, that's another 80 XP.
Oh my gosh, like you're dropping clue XPs.
Exactly. And so suddenly the party's like, oh wow, okay.
It's Colonel Mustard with the knife.
Yeah. I mean, there's literally an entire board game based around that. You don't fight anybody. You don't fight anybody in Clue, you know? But you
got secret passageways and discovering.
Right. Yeah. And so finding these, finding things like clues, lore, secrets, treasure,
Hmm.
Interesting rooms. Reward people for exploring your dungeon, for chewing into the into the scenery and really sort of getting into it and being like, hey, you know what? This is rewarded. When we play, one of the things that I really respect about you, as a player, especially ironically enough in our non-AP games, but um, is you do take good notes,
Mm.
and you are actively trying to pay attention. You're writing things down. You're trying to sort of connect these dots. Reward people for doing that and put in the effort as a dungeon master when you're building a dungeon, because then the players won't just be interested in the encounters and in the monsters. They will be interested in the dungeon itself, its lore, its history, its architecture, its makeup, it's why it's there, what it's there for. And as they discover these things and you just keep rattling off these XP mounts to them, they are going to be like, wow, that's really awesome. And in the grand scheme of things like 10 XP don't even seem like that much. But like, if you are able to figure out little fun, interesting ways to award even minor XP for 10 at a time for something that's really interesting or cool that the party did inside of the dungeon, like, maybe
If you did 8 of them, it's a moderate fight that you just avoided.
That's exactly right. But like, let's say that, even something simple, like maybe it's really dark out. Okay. And we saw what your map looked like here. I'll bring it back in just for the folks at home. But like, they saw it was really dark out. And so maybe like somebody goes, hey, it's really dark in here. What if like it's bright out here. This is like the, outside. What if like I make like a mirror here and then like I put another mirror here and like we sort of like direct, the light, can we like direct the light beam into this dungeon to sort of like, fill it up? And you're like, oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, that's a 10 XP, right? You're interacting with my game. You are being rewarded for your clever use of the scenario and the terrain, So there's a lot of different ways that you can really
Aaron, our friend and fellow GM, tested me with my mapping ability. I mapped, if you remember, our goblin encounter in a PF2 game, and then he said, "All right, I want you to get out now without using the map." And had to test my memory as I mapped. He grabbed the map from my notebook and said, "All right, Bob, you've been drawing this map. Now escape. You're in a hurry. You can't have time to look at the map. You have to go." And I was able to get out again because of that ability. But I think even he was like, yeah, gain a hero point. At least in that we were doing hero points, but it was, you were rewarding your player for that sort of mental cleverness or mental ability.
And I mean,
different than encounters. Yeah,
and hero points are really really interesting, and they can be a good way to reward your players. But I'll be honest with you, XP, that works. That works a lot better.
Yeah, no, I like that.
And in fact, actually, if you look at table 10.8 in the core rule book, that the minor, the moderate, and the major, and that's our 10, 30, it looks like a 16, 80 for these minor accomplishments. There's also a little asterisk here, and it says these typically earn a hero point as well.
Ooh.
So, because remember, when you award XP, you're giving it to everybody in the party. So maybe you say, hey, 30 XP, everybody knows that means everybody gained 30 XP, right? Towards that 1,000 that you need to level. And you say, and Derek gained a hero point because like maybe I'm the one who really put it all together.
Yeah. So, the team gets the XP. It's not divided, but we earned it together. But you, Derek, you were the clever one there.
Yeah. And you
get that.
And that's a great way to do that as well. And this isn't really about dungeon design, but remember, whatever you want to encourage, you need to reward.
True.
So I'm talking about a dungeon. So I'm talking about rewarding encounters and exploration, right? But you could also use that table for role playing, right?
Okay.
And if you think, during any of these phases of the game, if somebody does something that's really awesome, that's really in character. When I say role playing, I don't mean like, I want to just crush this. Like, I mean, making a decision because your character would make that decision because of your character's unique combination of ancestry and background and class and alignment and personality and goals and motivations, you can also award somebody XP for that. You can say, wow, that was a really cool moment of role playing that, maybe the group did or the party did or you did, or like 2 players really had a cool moment, and everybody at the table gets an XP. And maybe you give them the hero point as well, because you say like, hey, I want to encourage you guys to do this. I want you to find opportunities to role play well. I'm going to award that for XP. You don't have to, but
encourage, like you said, you encourage what you want at the game table.
Whatever you reward, you are going to be encouraging. And for a dungeon, then you should definitely be thinking of ways you can reward role playing. But, at the same time, when you're in a dangerous goblin, undead, infested, haunted ruin, maybe that's not the best time for us to be talking about our feelings. So maybe you don't really want to, be encouraging people to be having these sort of like, cry sessions in the middle of the session. But you definitely need to, and you definitely want to reward exploration. And by doing that, sometimes you can do double duty. And, exploration is much faster than encounters, right?
Yes.
So you might only get through 3 fights in a night, and you might only get 300 XP from those 3 fights, but maybe you also gain 250 XP from your exploration, right? And now you are at 550 and you are over halfway there.
Oh yeah. That sounds much better.
Right.
2-session leveling. That sounds like a really nice
pace. And some of that comes down to your pace. I mean, if you're really that impatient, make it 500 XP to level, instead of 1,000. But again, figure out what it is that you want to reward, figure out what it is that's important to your game. If you want your players to really interact and learn about and, really breathe in and breathe out, and, especially with a dungeon in a dungeon-based game, this isn't an AP where you're going to like go into a place, maybe be there for 1 session, maybe 2 max, and then they're done, right? This is something that you expect them to be at for 3 to 5 sessions, maybe even more. And so there's really, you want them to sort of like learn the place. It's almost like a second, like another member of the party, right? It's something that they come to learn, and they really, and you can really rely on that by rewarding exploration. So the last thing that I want to talk about is, again, we talked about, we don't want to restrict player agency, or free player agency. No, it was a sports joke, Bob.
Free agency is the joke. I was like, are you talking about free agency?
So another common mistake that I will see is a DM will say, okay, I've got this dungeon, and I'm going to make it really simple. I'm going to say, okay, I've got 5 rooms in this dungeon, and roughly speaking, I want the party to be level 2.
Okay.
When they're done with this dungeon. Okay. Roughly. Okay. So I'm going to go 200, 200, 200, 200, 200, 200, 200.
Yeah.
This is sort of that AP model.
Yep.
Here's the problem. In a dungeon, you might go eep, eep, and then go to level 2.
Yeah, that's the worry.
Right.
They skip, because we're encouraging player agency to be able to go whatever they're going.
That's right. So they might skip entire sections of your dungeon, and that's okay, because when they get down to level 2, they might go, this is a little tough. I don't think we're high enough level yet. Or maybe they'll have some hard fights and earn their XP. They'll even get more XP because the fights will be a little bit harder, and they'll get their level up that way. But they might say, okay, you know what, guys, this is a little too tough. Let's go back to level 1. But now you've forced them to have to go to every room in your dungeon.
Well, it sounds like a video game. Like, guys, we got to grind a little more.
We got to grind it. We got to clear the level, right? The key to this is if your players need 1,000 XP to level, you need to put like 1,500 to 2,000 XP in your level. Because you can't make it so that the only way that they could ever level is by clearing every room. You have to put more, right? There's going to be treasures that they are going to miss. There are going to be encounters, monsters, traps, puzzles that they are not going to get to. And you shouldn't force them to have to get to all those just to get to level 2, because then you've basically turned your game into a linear railroad, because you're basically saying, well, if you actually want to succeed, you have to be level 2. You have to hit every single fight on this level. And that is not what we want to go here. Instead, what you want to do is you want to sprinkle, a bunch of different XP things all throughout your dungeon and, use them so that the party can tackle maybe a couple of them, maybe a bunch of them. You know what I mean? Like they can pick the route that they take and they could go, okay, well, that's 240, 360, 460, 580, da, 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 da. Okay, we leveled up. And yeah, they didn't hit all the rooms, but they are now level 2.
Yeah. That's a good thought.
And that's also, comes into sort of the size of your room. So we talked about before, the standard model is that you need 10 encounters to level.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we talked about maybe we award exploration as well. We don't want to actually fight 10, when I say fight, but we don't actually want to do 10 puzzles and 10 traps and 10 hazards and 10 fights. We want to do maybe, I don't know, 6. Right? So we're saying that there's going to be maybe like 6 encounters, which would generate about 600 XP.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe there's an additional 400 XP that we can find in exploration. Well, if I don't want my players to hit all 6 encounters in order to level up, I need more than 6 encounters.
Yes.
I would need something like 9 to 12.
Yep.
And that's kind of where that 12 number comes from, which is sort of the high level. And I like to tend to err on the side of too much rather than too little.
Because they can be a little bit maybe more powerful than
right. Because what that gives them the option to do is maybe they do this route and they go to level 2 and they say, hey guys, we don't have to go down. We aren't on a timeline. This isn't a video game. We can, if we are having fun, and maybe we want to, flex a little. We're a little bit more powerful. Or we learned about the rumor that over here that there's apparently some sort of maybe cool magical item. Maybe we're not directly interested in the experience, but we are definitely interested in the cool magical item. And so they come over here and you're right. They do gain a little bit more XP. And then maybe by the time they go to level 2, they're at 1500 or, they're 500 XP already into level 2 on their way to level 3. And
now you did this in your Dragon's Delve campaign, right? Where people like grinded a little more or got leveled up and then they skipped levels because they were like, we're going to go to this level or that level.
Yeah.
Again, really big player agency there.
Right. Well, we talked about this, I think, again, more in the bonus content from the Patreon. But, certainly it's the case that, and we could talk about that actually, to not confuse anybody. We can talk about that a little bit after this. In case people don't know, we always do some extra content that's sort of secondary or tertiary to the main content, and we make that available to our patrons. So if you are interested in joining our Patreon, there's a link below. We've got a lot of exciting new things going on this month. We are launching our Northern Reaches Pathfinder 2 mega game, which I am definitely going to do a video about and talk all about. Very proud about it. We're putting a lot of work into it.
Yeah.
And we have, dozens of community run Pathfinder 2 games. We have our own Forge server with something like, we now have like 8 Foundry licenses. Actually, we have 2 Forge servers. We have like 8 or 9 Foundry licenses. So we can run a bunch of concurrent, Pathfinder games, but we also run 7th Sea and Blades in the Dark and Mouse Guard and Burning Wheel and first edition AD&D. So definitely.
Yeah, the Patreon really is just a immense, immerse group of people that have just had so much GM experience, so much player experience, not just in PF2, which is our majority focus, but just, everything. I've played random games with people and learning just different skills in other systems.
So yeah, definitely encourage you to check that out. And I want to say thanks to our current existing patron members. They help support this channel. They're the reason that this actual series came back. Not a big money maker for us, but the patrons wanted it. And so if you are enjoying this, please leave a like, leave a comment, let the patrons know that you appreciate them asking for it.
And you guys are making me a better GM, which means when I'm running my Northern Reaches games, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So that is where we are going to leave it today. We are going to do some homework, Bob.
Oh, great. Hold on. Let me
well,
my pen.
Don't worry about it. We were going to come back to the XP. Your homework is to take what we discussed today, the feedback, and rebuild your flowchart model. But I will make it a little bit tougher. I want you to put some thought into some of maybe the encounters and some of the XP triggers that might be in your dungeon. right?
Okay.
Like just a high level. Start thinking about
basically take this lesson plus last lesson and amplify what I have
and merge them together.
Okay.
All right. So
I'm hoping for a C or C plus this next time.
You should be aiming for an A. B is for
I'm aiming for improvement.
All right, fine. I'll take improvement. It better be a B. I'll say that. Okay,
I better start practicing. You're going on vacation. I got time.
That's right. So I want to say thanks to Bob for being a dutiful and patient student. I want to say thanks to you for joining us. And lastly, I want to say welcome to the Knights of Last Call.